Hello there and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is L24 daily special coverage, and here we back to cover the Ukraine-Russia conflict. So here is the latest on the war and its ripple effects across the globe. Fighting near a nuclear plant in southern Ukraine, which left one employee dead, sparked the global outcry, with 42 countries calling on Russia to withdraw from the plant. According to a statement by the European Union dated Friday and posted Sunday, the statement says Russia's military aggression at and near the plant poses a threat to nuclear safety. The city of Enerhaunder was hit at least 6 times, the regulator said, further shaking the enclave where many nuclear power plant employees live. Russian President Vladimir Putin, on the other side, told North Korean leader Kim Jong that the two countries will expand their bilateral relations. North Korean state media reported Monday. Two leaders exchanged congratulatory letters to make Korea's Liberation Day. To analyze all this information, I'm joined live by Mr. Valentin Yakushik, an international relations professor from Ukraine, and Mr. Ulf Sandmark, chairman of the Chiller Institute from Sweden, and Mr. Gregory Simons, associate professor and researcher at Uppsala University and lecturer at the Department of Communication Sciences, also from Stockholm, Sweden. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us in this debate. A short break and we will be back. And so before we start our debate, let me read for you this piece of information. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in southern Ukraine has been shelled in recent days, and fears raised between residents in the region. Kyiv city in the Zaporizhzhia oblast of Ukraine bears the traces of heavy bombardments since the Russian forces launched a military operation in Ukraine on February 24th.
The situation cannot be predicted. I still assume that nobody, neither the Ukrainians nor the Russians, have an interest in actively damaging this power plant and doing anything that would massively damage the safety facilities. Because the bottom line is that nuclear power plant is not something that you can really use for military purpose.
So Valentin, since you're in Ukraine, where all is going on, I will be starting with you. So how can you explain the calling on Russia by more than 42 countries to withdraw its troops from the nuclear plant? Isn't one of the main reasons why Russia launched this military operation for the first place, to put hand on these nuclear plants?
Let me divide this issue in several layers and probably aspects. First layer, it's pure military. Russian troops, when invading Ukraine, they use these tactics as occupying nuclear power plants, 2 of them, one not functioning in Chernobyl, which they left later, and another Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, which is in Energodar city. From the pure military point of view, it's an effective tactics. When you put your own equipment and your soldiers into the power plant when you know that nobody will attack it. Because if somebody attacks, it means mutual destruction and self-destruction. This is pure political point of view, pure military point of view. From economic point of view, for the Russian invading forces, it's important to keep this nuclear power plant, Zaporozhye power plant, in the city of Energodar, as I said, because it produces 20% of whole electric energy of Ukraine. So for Russia, it's important to provide this energy to the occupied territories and probably also to Crimea. And for Ukraine, it's important that this power plant functions. And by the way, it continues functioning. The technical point of view or the aspect of this situation is that you cannot just stop functioning, this plant, and it continues producing energy for both Ukrainian controlled territory and non-controlled territories by Ukraine. There is I would say, a problem of secrets, of technological secrets and others, as Americans have already implanted there in this nuclear power plant their own software and their own elements of equipment. So Russians are using it, learning how it's functioning, understanding American secrets. And there is a geopolitical issue when the world wants to undertake some steps in order to stop the war and proposes something which is not acceptable for the Russian forces. Because, as the Russian leadership said, if they withdraw their forces from there, there will be threat that it will be controlled by somebody else. So now it is important that the world, that international community works out some plans, some particular actions, which will be mandatory for both sides, that nobody shells this nuclear power station, nobody creates the situation of self-destruction and destruction of a big part of the central European territory where millions of people live. Mm-hmm. So it's really an urgent issue, and it's a pity that the United Nations didn't manage to work out some practical steps. The discussion led only to the exchange of opinions which are not competitive with each other. Now, thinkers and spiritual leaders have to pay attention to this and also to learn, because it's not the last time when in the conflicts, interstate conflicts or inter-other conflicts, nuclear power plants will be used as part of a military strategy. So Perfect. It's important to have positive solution of the tragedy of Zaporozhye nuclear power plant and to learn how to act on similar cases in the future.
Thank you so much for this explanation. Very good indeed. Coming to you, Mr. Simons, as a European, this is a direct question. Who is winning this battlefield operations, and how can you explain the Russian troops spreading all over Ukraine, especially the nuclear plants? I mean, which strategy are working with?
The Russians are taking this slowly. I mean, they do not have the manpower, or do not want to use the manpower for what the West keeps on calling this overwhelming invasion. Rather, they are taking pieces bit by bit, because if there is this a large-scale attack, you get large-scale casualties. This would be a political problem at home. So Russia is winning it, and I mean, this can be seen with the battlefield casualties. For example, what has been released recently about the presumed battlefield casualties for Ukraine, which are massive. Even if they're getting the weapons, the manpower is going to run out first. And one can also see there is a certain demoralization of Ukrainian troops who are refusing to fight in some instances, whole units. So, I mean, this is an attritional war, but without what I would term as large-scale casualties. So this is definitely something psychological as it is political, because, I mean, going back as far as history goes, I mean, all wars are politics by another means, and this is certainly the case. I mean, if we're looking at this Zaporozhye power plant, I mean, this is an example at the tactical level where there are attempts to create a situation, what you would call probably this iconic moment, using these imagery of Chernobyl, and this is being used to try and force politics and, of this conflict. But I don't think it will alter things. I mean, especially as, I mean, Russia has the upper hand. I mean, it's gradually advancing, and the Ukrainian forces are getting ground down.
Quite understood. Coming to you, Mr. Ulf, Antonio Guterres, United Nations General Secretary, kept warning the world leaders to avoid any escalation forward that lead to a nuclear use of weapons. Do you really think we have reached this point of tension and a nuclear shot would be used?
Yes, there is absolutely such a danger, because as long as NATO and the Western world say they want to defeat Russia in Ukraine, this means that they are approaching a war between the West and Russia. It means a nuclear war. So we are very much approaching that. Also, the provocations from the United States to China increases the danger for a nuclear war. So we are very close to that. Actually, the discussion about Zaporizhzhia is very much a psychological warfare, like Mr. Simons was hinting at, because what we have is like a nuclear plant is very difficult to damage. You can go with it with a jet plane, and it will not be destroyed. It is very strong beton and steel coverage around this kind of nuclear plants. So this is not the danger. What the Ukraine government is doing here is trying to incite some kind of nuclear fear around this plant with this kind of weapons. But I think, just as Mr. Akushny said, there should be discussions internationally to come to an agreement on how to proceed, because both sides need to have the electricity from this. And just as with the grain question, there couldn't be a very good point of departure for a peace negotiation around the use of this nuclear plant for peaceful purposes and for the benefit of all parts of Ukraine.
Thank you ever so much for this explanation, Mr. Ulf. Now, coming to the second point of our discussion, according to Pyongyang, Russian President Vladimir Putin promised Kim Jong that his country and North Korea would expand their comprehensive and constructive bilateral relations with joint efforts. In a letter to Mr. Kim Jong for the for the anniversary of Korea's liberation, Mr. Putin stated that improved ties would be in both nations' best interest and would contribute to the stability and security of both Korean Peninsula and the wider Northeastern Asian region. Mr. Valentin, you are an international relations professor and you are well aware than any one of us in this world and the geopolitical changes and the shifts happening right now in the world. So what is your reading to these close ties between Moscow and North Korea, and to which side it is counted?
Well, why should we take into account on the connections between Russia and North Korea? There is a Chinese connection as well. When the United States, like Mrs. Pelosi, is playing with Chinese the most delicate issues, why not China tries to talk with Mr. Kim Jong-un in the same way? First, North Korea recognized the separatist republics, and then there were rumors that North Korea is ready to send its construction workers and a lot of its military to support these separatist republics. Well, in fact, to support Russian forces. How should we assess this? Is it realistic or just rumors? Well, our think tank, with which I cooperate, Ukrainian Institute of Politics, was one of the first who started analyzing this and said, well, it may be probable. For North Korean leadership, it's from economical point of view a working solution. From showing its weight in the entire world politics, it's also a kind of probable active policy. Well, and from technical, so-called technical organizational point of view, they use Russian and Soviet equipment, weapons. They are quite compatible with the Russian and separatist forces. So I think this may be one of possible developments. And what is important to see, it depends upon the United States policy towards China. If they continue to pressurize China, and there are new visits there to Taiwan now from the side of American top officials, then China and Russia may, in this tacit way, respond. So this is our view, which is not based of any sources from the side. It's from just general logic of events. So it's necessary to stop dangerous games on all sides, in North America, in Eastern Europe, in East Asia, and especially in Ukraine. We need to find solution for Ukrainian crisis, for invasion of Russian troops into Ukraine by peaceful ways, but not going to another stage involving new countries there.
Quite understood, Mr. Valentin. Coming to you, Mr. Simons, don't you think that the latest visit of Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan pushed Russia to speed up its spreading movement in the Asian continent? First Iran and now North Korea. Who is next to join these black ships of the world now?
Well, I mean, what you see is action and reaction. I mean, Biden made it clear in the run-up to the presidential election in 2020 that he intended, or at least his handlers intended, for America to take back the position as global policeman, which is something that failed in miserably for decades. But aside from that, this has brought about some actions and reactions. The actions have been to bring about Brzezinski's strategic imperatives, which is to consolidate American alliances. It is to break up those alliances which oppose them. And so, I mean, what you've been seeing is the Americans have been trying to do alliance building or consolidating, for example, trying to spread NATO from the North Atlantic and Europe to create this idea of an Arab NATO to this idea of NATO in the Indian Pacific region, which is nothing about defense or security. It's all about geopolitics to oppose, to weaken, to contain Russia, China, Iran. But at the same time, they've been trying to break up the alliances of China, Russia. I mean, we've seen events in Belarus, in Kazakhstan, in the South Caucasus. These are all aimed at, and we see what's happening with Taiwan. So this seems to be a blueprint to create these problems, geopolitical problems, out of something which was not there before, because the consensus used to be the one China policy, and now they're trying to reinvent that and go back. Like they did, NATO would not move 1 inch forward. So, I mean, the US is doing this not out of strength, it's doing this out of weakness and desperation. You've got a hegemon which is going into decline, and it doesn't want to give up its power and privilege on the international stage.
Very good indeed. It's quite a point you have raised. Now, away of these war games between China and Russia as well as US, Mr. Ulf, recently there is a list of names that comes out full of analysts and politicians whom they have a different idea of backing up Ukraine with weapons and funding, such as those speakers of the Schiller Institute, as it is shown, looking for a better solution beyond war in Ukraine. These names are considered to Ukraine government as Russian propaganda agents, declaring them to information terrorists and threatening legal and other action as war criminals. Likewise, Helga Ziep-Larouche, founder of the Schiller Institute, and the Danish parliamentarian Marie Karuk, and so on, and other considered as promoters of Russian narratives. What are you saying about this? And are you one of those named people to be Russian agents, since you are a member of the Schiller Institute?
Yes, I am on this hit list that the Ukraine government has put together about opposition people who are not following the narrative the Ukraine government likes, or actually it is the Western NATO forces narrative. And so out of these 72 people on this list, 40 are connected to the Schiller Institute either directly or participants in conference where we discussed peace developments and peace proposals for the Ukraine conflict. And this was so much detested by the government of Ukraine, so they put us on this list as agents and to be put on called information terrorists and to, if possible, be charged as war criminals. So this was a very strong attack against freedom of speech of our people, and it was included in this list many professionals, professors and scholars and academics and politicians, and they are definitely not a part of any such campaign, but they try to raise the issues that is important for the world to come out of this crisis. Helga Seplarush has proposed very much a new architecture for peace and development for the world, where we would find cooperation and development as a kind of basis for cooperation and peace. So this is something we will have in a new conference coming up in the 10th and 11th of September, and we will continue with this. What is important is that the outrage and protests against this list was so strong that the Ukraine government had to withdraw the list. So now it is closed. It's not there anymore. They have taken it away from their homepage. So now we are not on this hit list anymore. So it shows that it is possible to defend the human rights of free speech. And even though this was supported by the US State Department and the British Foreign Office, this institution who organized these meetings where they published this list. So it is actually an Anglo-American policy to try to get at opposition to their policies with the help of Ukraine, and now they had to withdraw, so we can go forward now with proposals for peace and development for Ukraine instead of this kind of just trying to silence the oppositions, what they try to do.
Quite understood. Mr. Simons, you are an expert in crisis management, communications, media, and armed conflicts. So what is your comment on this? Is anyone against or even neutral over the Ukraine government in this war is considered as war criminal and the Russian narrative promoter?
Well, I mean, this brings to my mind a couple of points. First of all, I mean, it's utterly Orwellian doublespeak language, where people who are taking moderate or reasonable positions are named as being radical, and those who are proposing radical and violence are proposed as being reasonable. I would also liken this, I mean, it's once, I mean, I think it was Joseph Goebbels once said that the best strategy of defense was to shout and accuse your enemy that of which you are yourself guilty. So, I mean, there is no place for it if we talk about, if the EU is actually to hold to their fundamental values and norms which they preach to the rest of the world, they should have been much more active and vocal against such a rather heinous act of intimidation and character assassination.
Coming to you, Mr. Valentin, what are you saying about this? And what is your interpretation on the efforts made by the Schiller Institute? And as Mr. Ove said, this is an Anglo-American policy.
Maybe many of the participants will not like my view on this, but I think it's normal. Well, normal during the war, such kind of behavior. If you are not with us, you are against us. This is one of the slogans which is used. And you remember this saying, à la guerre comme à la guerre, at war as at war. So there are two clear alliances in the contemporary world, and the Ukraine is the battlefield among these two alliances. One, alliance of more than 40 nations, NATO and its allies, and on another side, Russia with its only ally, Belarus. Who are the rest? The rest maybe tacitly supporting one side or another side, or try to be neutral, to be above this and care about human rights. But then each of these warring alliances will not be happy with this. So now we have this case when there are positions of China, of India, of Vietnam, and I suppose of Schiller Institute as well in this line, who try to propose some third way, and they meet angry reaction on one side or another side. What to do? Nothing can be done at this point when there is a real war on the territory in Ukraine, and there is war of ideas and of mass media. Russia is fighting against agents, so-called agents of the West in their own press. They call them foreign agents. And in America, in many Western countries, Russian mass media is prohibited. There is no Russia Today and so on. It's normal from the positions of the governments. On one side, government, and on another side, we cannot do much on this. So my appeal is that people who are ready to think and who have spiritual power, they have to get united and not to be attached to something one-sided. They have to propose the solution for the war.
Thank
Invasion
you, Mr. Valent.
is an act of aggression. It has to be stopped. But
Perfect.
there must be arrangements for security in Europe and in the world. There must be fair solutions for international relations problems.
Perfectly understood. 4 minutes left to reach the end of this discussion. Mr. Ulf, how Sweden is affected by the war in Ukraine so far, and what is the extra given after being a NATO member? Briefly, please.
Well, Sweden is affected with a dramatic crash of the economy going on, because we have the huge electricity prices, the huge gas prices, and all these kind of problems with the food prices. So we are going into a very, very hot autumn and the crash of the economy because of the sanctions, basically. It's the West who has inflicted this on ourselves. And we, in Sweden, is just continuing with integrating with NATO, even though we have not even become a member yet. So we are now trying to block Russia out of the Baltic Sea and the straits between Denmark and Sweden and so on. So this is a very bad policy now from the Swedish side to increase the tensions. What is needed is to find solutions to come out of these tensions, and also to find a way to get out of the economic catastrophe, because this will kill especially people not only in Western Europe and the United States, but also in the third world. We will have very big hunger and devastation of millions of people if we don't take responsibility for the world and for the mankind.
Thank you, Mr. O, for this explanation. 2 minutes left. Mr. Simons, beyond the battlefield updates, yesterday Hungary got the extra official gas extra deliveries from Russia based on the new signings. So we can say they have saved their economy and what is works based on this energy source particularly. But what about the other European countries? What about Germany precisely?
I don't see any hope for Germany. They've allowed themselves to become a client state of the US. I mean, this was clear even before the war began. This is what the US intended, greater control over Germany, because we already had talk about cancelling the Nord Stream 2 pipeline before the war began. And now the change in government, which is even more pro-US, the European Union is now, I mean, it can't fool itself independent. I mean, it's completely and utterly I would say, aligned with the US strategic imperatives, but it's a path to oblivion and self-destruction, which Europe will experience probably before the US.
Quite understood. Mr. Gregory Simons from Sweden, as well Mr. Ulf Sandmark from Sweden, and Mr. Valentin from Ukraine. Thank you ever so much for being with us in this debate. To this end, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much as well for being with us. And for more updates, you may follow our social platform network, Facebook, Instagram, and even YouTube. Bye-bye.